We have I'm doing a message today from the book of Ruth, and I'm really excited about it. So buckle up, Buttercup, because we're going. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. Ruth, actually, let me say this. If you've been with us, you know that we're walking through this teaching series where every Sunday we talk about kind of the next story in the Bible. We started literally in the beginning. It said in the beginning, and that's where we started. And we're going to end in the end. And so that's where we're going to end because it's the end. So we're walking from the beginning to the end of the Bible, and we're kind of giving an overview of the scriptures. And the whole point of this, of doing it like this, is that we want to kind of like pull out the big story that's told and woven in and through every story. We want to pull out that story that's kind of imprinted upon every story. We want to pull it out so that you can look at it and know that God has been doing the same thing since the beginning of the world till the end of the world. God is pursuing you. He's pursuing a relationship with you. And this is good for us, and it glorifies Him. And so the whole point of kind of the easiest way to break down Christianity is that we believe in a God who went through great, crazy lengths to have a relationship with you. And if you knew all the details of it, you'd be shocked at how much He wants to be with you, how much He loves you. That's the whole point of this. That's the big story that's woven in and through all the other stories. So if you've been with us, you know we've been in the Old Testament, in the early portion of Israel's history. So let's do a quick review. Who's excited? Israel is enslaved in Egypt. Somebody started clapping. That's funny. Israel is enslaved in Egypt. And then God says, hey, I don't want you to be slaves anymore. So He delivers them. Boom, magic. Then He takes them out into the wilderness and He gives them the law. And He's like, hey, this is how I want us to behave as children of God. I want you to behave this way. Then they can't do that. So He has them wander around in the desert. He provides for them. He gives them food and water and shelter for 40 years. He provides for His kids. And then they go into the promised land, and He provides for them there. He drives out the nations before them. And then if you were here last week, you know that next comes this 350-year period of the Judges. And Judges is dark, man. It is, everything in Judges is bad. Even the good guys turn out to be bad guys very often. Judges is dark, everything's bad, but God is still working, and He's still moving. And that's kind of the whole point of Judges. Tucked into that 350-year time period of the Judges, where everything is bad, everybody's bad, is a really good story. Tucked into that 350-year time period is a story that is kind of a light in the darkness. It's a story to show us that even when things are, man, it seems like everything's going to hell in a handbasket. Sometimes it just seems like everything's on fire. But in the midst of that, there are still good things that are going on. This is the story of Ruth, and we're going to be covering that story today. Ruth has 4 chapters, and so what we're going to do is similar to last week. I want to give you an overview of the book of Ruth because it's so beautiful and lovely, and I think that you should read it, and I want you to understand what you're reading when you go to read it. So here is the big idea from the book of Ruth. This is the big idea. This is the thing I want you to remember. It's this. It's all a part of the story. It's all part of the story. Here's what I mean by that. You need to know, there's 2 things that you need to know about the book of Ruth. Here's the first one. It's crazy. It's real crazy. You ready? Ruth is about Ruth. It's nuts. Ruth is about Ruth. Here's what I mean by that. If you've been following along with us, you know that there's 2 main characters in this story. There is God and His people. And the story has been about God saving His people, providing for His people, giving the law to His people, helping His people out when they need help, giving them a place to belong. It's been all about His people. It's been Egypt versus Israel. It's been plagues and splitting the ocean and the Red Sea and fire on a mountain. It's been on this massive, gigantic scale. And then you slam into Ruth, and Ruth is just about Ruth. It's not about the people of God. It's about one person. And it's supposed to, as we're reading the Bible, it's supposed to be a little bit jarring. You're supposed to be like, wait, where's Israel in this? What's going on? Like did that story just stop? And the whole point is to get you to dare to believe that the small story is just as important as the big story. Your story, that seems small and insignificant, that at times can seem like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Your story is a part of the big story. Ruth is just about Ruth. And what that means is that the small stories of individuals are just as important as the big story. Here's the second thing that's kind of jarring about Ruth. God is absent in the book of Ruth. This is a really kind of a crazy concept. The narrator who's telling the story of Ruth never once mentions God. If you've been following along the last few weeks, you know that the basic outline of a Bible story is this. The people done messed up. God wants to save them, so God does something. Then the people react to what God did. And so it's very much about the two characters. God is doing stuff, and the people are messing up, but he's saving them. That's kind of the outline of every story. But in Ruth, it's about one person, and God isn't credited with doing anything. And it's weird. It's kind of jarring. You're like, where is God in this story? But the scholars and the people who study this stuff, they're like, this is a part of the brilliance of the book of Ruth. The author of Ruth has removed God, and it's supposed to be like jarring to you. And the reason he's done that is he's inviting you to fill in the blank. He's getting you to ask the question, where is God? So that you, as you read this story, you're reading it through the lens of, where is God in this little person's story? Where is he moving? There's a part in the story where she literally gets up and goes to work. That's a part of the story. And what the author of Ruth is getting you to do is ask the question, where is God when I'm getting up and going to work? Where is God when I'm taking the kids to school? Where is God when I'm late for church? Where is God when I'm at my kid's sporting event and it's been going on for 7 hours and I'm so bored? Like, where is God in the day-to-day, minute-to-minute, second-by-secondness of your life? By removing God, he's inviting us to put him in and imagine where he is throughout this whole story. It's kind of brilliant. It's a brilliant literary move. So here's the thing. Let's combine those two ideas. That Ruth is just about the small story. It's about one person, not the nation, one person. And it's a story in which we're invited to imagine how God is working in and through the little day-to-day decisions and actions that people take. Here's what those two things together means. It means that it's all part of the story. Every part of your life is a part of the story that God is unfolding in human history. Your little decisions, the mundane decisions, and the story of your life, they matter just as much as the big story. When God acts in big ways to save Israel, we tend to look at that and be like, whoa, God, you do big things. He wants, with the book of Ruth, he's challenging us to be like, you're doing big things in my life too. Because here's the thing, I think as Christians, it's really easy to read the Bible and become obsessed with the grandeur and the bigness of the story. God appears to Moses in a bush, it's burning and it's not consumed. Miracle! God has Israel walk around Jericho 7 times during the week and then 7 times on the last day, and the walls fall down. Miracle! And then, David slays Goliath with a stone, and the giant falls, and you're like, miracle! And here's the thing. We can get obsessed with the big things that God is doing, and it's very easy when you get to that point to think that God is only the God of big things. And the little decisions that I have to make, what I'm wearing today, the route I take to work, the little stuff that I do in my life, that doesn't matter. It does. And the beauty of the book of Ruth is that it pushes back on that idea. It's getting us, it's challenging us to see how God is involved in the everyday portion of our life. It all belongs to the story. So Ruth is 4 chapters. Each chapter is a different scene. Each scene has its own sort of theme, a theme that is a part of the story. Some of these themes we would rather were not part of the story, but they are. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk through Ruth chapter by chapter, and I want to show you 4 things that belong to Ruth's story and how they play into the big story that God is telling. And I think at the same time what you're going to see is how these things work in your life and how your life is a part of the big story as well. We're literally starting in Ruth 1. If you brought your Bibles, turn to Ruth. It's after Judges and before Samuel. I had to practice that. I was like, wait, what is it before? Have you ever had to do the alphabet backwards? It's like, I can't think like that. Anyway, Ruth 1, chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. Famine means that the economy's bad, there's no food. It's the days when the judges ruled. I already told you about that. And a man of Bethlehem in Judah, if that sounds familiar to you about this time of year, it probably should start seeming familiar. That's where Jesus was born. Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn or travel. He becomes an immigrant in the country of Moab. He and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man is a great name, Elimelech. That's just fun to say. I'm not going to make you say it, but I want to. Elimelech. It's fun. Anyway, Elimelech means God is my king. That's what it means. God is my king. The names in this story are really crucial. And the name of his wife was Naomi. Naomi means pleasant. Have you ever met somebody you're like, man, they're good. That was nice. I love being with them. Naomi, that's what her name is. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. That means sickness and wanting. Whoops. A little bit of a foreboding there, foreshadow. They were Ephrathites. Ephrathites is the clan that they belonged to from Bethlehem in Judah. So they went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died. And she was left with her 2 sons. And these took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the other was Ruth. And they lived there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and without her husband. I want you to see this because this is hard, but it's true, that tragedy is a part of the story. Tragedy is a part of the story. This book opens with hardship and with tragedy. To help you kind of get acquainted to this, can we put the map up there? I want to show you kind of where we're at in the world. You see Jerusalem is the northernmost city there. Bethlehem is just south of Jerusalem, and the country of Moab is across the Dead Sea from Bethlehem. So there's a famine in Bethlehem. They go to Moab, and it's in Moab where the husband and the 2 sons, they die. And so here's what happens. Tragedy strikes. And so Naomi, pleasant, she wants to go back to Bethlehem. And so now she's got options. She can, because she's the matriarch, she's in charge of the family, she can compel her daughters-in-law to go with her back to Bethlehem. But here's what she knows about that. They're foreign women, they're Moabites, and the Israelites have been commanded not to marry foreign women. Now, here's the problem of that back in this day. Unfortunately, the future and the success of a woman back in this day was always tied to her family or her husband. And so when your husband dies, and then the rest of his family dies, your future's pretty bleak. And so if you go and you're going to move with your mother-in-law to another country where you're also still not allowed to get remarried, your future you're going to live in poverty. It is choosing to live in poverty. So Naomi, who is pleasant, she says, I want you guys to stay. Stay here, go back to your families, get new husbands, live your life. That's what Naomi says. In the midst of her tragedy, she thinks of other people, which is just a testament to what God has done in her heart. She is a pleasant person. She thinks of other people in the midst of her tragedy, Naomi. And she tells her daughters to leave. Orpah, her name means gazelle, and like a gazelle, she runs. And it's not like it was a bad conflict. She kisses her mother-in-law, she loves on her, and then chooses to stay and get a new husband in Moab. Ruth, however, clings to Naomi. She clings to her. And she says this kind of famous line. She says, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Where you die, I will die. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And Ruth says, I'm staying with you. And you have to understand what Ruth is choosing. She is choosing to live in abject poverty. There is no hope for her future if she stays with her mother-in-law. And that's what she's chosen to do, to love on her mother-in-law. And I want you to see this, because tragedy belongs to our stories. And you have to ask this question, what is God doing in this story? What is he doing in the tragedy? And I want you to see this, because what's happening to Naomi is God is doing something. He gave her Ruth. Do you know what Ruth means? It comes from the word friend. Ruth means friend. In the midst of Naomi's tragedy, God is still doing good things in her life. And you got to know that because sometimes when life gets hard, it can really seem like everything is bad, just like in Judges. But you have to have an eye out for the little ways that God is providing for you. Now, here's the other question the other thing I want to tell you is that tragedy is in the first chapter of Ruth, and that's intentional. Because in the Bible never shies away from tragedy. Bad stuff happens. That's kind of, we live in this world, and this world is broken, and bad stuff happens to people who live in this world. And the Bible doesn't ignore that. It doesn't say just get over that. It says, no, this is really bad. Tragedy happens. But tragedy always happens towards the beginning of the story. You have to see this. Tragedy is never the end of the story for a Christian. Your life never ends with tragedy. You may die, but your story continues. What we believe as Christians is that there is an afterlife. There is a life with God where our story continues. Sometimes in the midst of tragedy, we can so often think, this is it. I'm done. My life is over. I lost my job. My life is over. I lost this relationship. My life is over. That's it. But you have to know from the book of Ruth where tragedy fits in the story. It's in the beginning. Because tragedy is often, in Christianity, it is the birthplace of hope. Tragedy is the springboard for what God is going to bring next into your life. The greatest tragedy that ever occurred was Jesus dying on the cross, God dying. But that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning of the goodness. Then after he dies, he rose again, conquering Satan, sin, and death so that we can have newness of life. Tragedy is never, ever the end. It is never the end. So don't let tragedy have the final word over your life. Don't stay there because God brings tragedy, but God brings you out of it as well. And what we're going to see at the end of the story is that the tragedy is reversed. There's a reversal. We'll take you there next. Well, not next, but at the end of the message. I want to continue here. So tragedy is a part of the story, and you have to know that because this is very often where the good stuff starts to come. It's the birthplace of hope is when the bad stuff is happening. Here's the next thing. I really want to bring this out because I think this is really important. The next thing that is a part of our stories is the work. Let me show you what I mean by that. Here's Ruth 2. So they've gone back to Bethlehem, and this is where the story starts back up. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. New character, his name's Boaz. He's a worthy man, means he's a good dude, all right? You ever hung out with somebody like, that's a good dude. Not Elimelech, Boaz. That's Boaz. Okay. And Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. I'll explain that in a second. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to a part of the field that belongs to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. I want you to see this, because this is really important. All the commentators are like, look at how hard Ruth works. They move back and she goes right to work. And I'm like, yeah, that's really cool. She does. She goes right to work. But think about this. Think about how much work Ruth had to do before she could do that work. Have you ever had a tragedy in your life? Have you ever lost somebody? Have you ever lost something that was very close to you? Maybe it was your career. Maybe it was your sense of security. Maybe it was your bank account. Maybe it was just like, maybe everything that you own went up in flames, burned in a fire. Maybe you've lost something. The time period after that tragedy is often the hardest time in your life. What does Ruth do in that time period? She moves back to Bethlehem, chooses poverty to stay with her mother-in-law. Where are they living? This is the thing that I always like it doesn't say. Here's the thing, did they pitch a tent in the middle of a field somewhere? Some commentators say that maybe they had like a family house that they left 10 years ago. So nobody's lived in this house for 10 years. It's dilapidated. It's falling down. That's where Ruth is. She lives in poverty. Where's she going to get food? She's in survival mode. And the amazing thing to me is after the death of her husband, living with a woman who is so stuck on that tragedy, this is a sad, hard place. And Ruth chooses to get out of that sad, hard place and do some work. But in order to do that work, I need you to see this, that you have to do some other work inside of you. In Christianity, we have this term, we call it sanctification. It's basically it's the idea that you are saying no to the old ways of life. You are you're saying no to sin, and you're growing in holiness and righteousness. Oftentimes, after a tragedy, what you have to work on inside before you can do any work outside is letting go of resentment, letting go of bitterness, letting go of anxiety, letting go of depression. Look at, man, how much work do you think Ruth had to do to just get out of bed in the morning? And here she is. She's doing it. She does the work before the work. And I need you to see this, that work is a part of the story. It's a part of your story. And as we sort of like crawl our way back to life after a tragedy, that work, I need you to hear this, that work, we use the word sanctification for it because it's a holy work. Like your soul is being transformed. And what I mean by calling that holy is that work is important and honorable. And sometimes, man, I don't know if you've had a coworker or a family member go through something really hard, and then they're trying to recover, and then the rest of the family or the coworkers are just crapping on them, you know? Like I can't believe you can't show up to work on time. Or I can't believe you don't want to come to Thanksgiving this year. Or I can't believe you, and we just kind of like put them down. No, here's the thing, they're in that vulnerable time in which they're doing holy and important work. They're trying to make their soul look more like Jesus. And there's an honor in that I want you to see. I got to move on. But tragedy and the work, those are a part of the story. Those are important parts. Now, I got to move on. We're going to switch to something really happy. Okay, so can you feel the switch a little bit? I need you to be like, okay, dust it off, like, throw the tragedy, work, get it off you. Okay, we're moving on to romance. Because that's the whole point of this book. All right, I'm going to read to you a large section of this book because I want you to see just how much of this book is devoted to the romance between Ruth and Boaz. Because at this point in the story, we've had these characters introduced. Boaz is called a worthy man. You've seen how Ruth has proved herself worthy. She has good character. She stays with her mother-in-law. And if you're reading closely, what you should be thinking is, these two should get together. Yes. Good news. They do. Here we go. So now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz, okay? Ruth goes out to glean in his fields. We already kind of talked about. She's doing the work. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz, it just seems funny to me because we don't talk like that, but that's how they talk. Anyway, then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, he sees Ruth, he says this, "Whose young woman is this?" You have to hear in your head, "Who's that lady?" He's like, "Whoa, talk to me about her. Like, who is that?" Okay? And he sees her, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, who is this woman?" And so then he finds out, I'm skipping a couple verses, they tell him her whole backstory. Then Boaz said to Ruth, he goes up to her, and he says, "Now, listen, my daughter. Do not glean on another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women." Okay, he calls her my daughter, and he is romantically interested in her, so that seems a little bit weird, but every culture has like weird pet names. Like we use the word babe or baby, and that's like weird. Like I'm romantically interested in you, so I'm going to call you babe. It's weird, okay? The daughter thing is weird too, but we do it too, so, no one's innocent. He says, "Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women." So he's got other young women who are in poverty, who the way that kind of poverty worked back then is God provides in the law to landowners, he says, don't take everything. He says, you can have most of what your crops produce, reap that, take it in. And what they would do is they would cut down all the stalks of barley or wheat, and they would wrap them up, and then they would take them to another place to separate the grain from the rest of the plant. Okay, that was called threshing, the threshing floor. But in the practice of that, when they scooped them all up, they wouldn't get it all. And so God said, when you don't get it all, leave that for somebody else. Like, leave that for the poor. And so this is what Ruth is doing. She's going to do that work. She's going to go to the field to get this work. And it's there that Boaz notices her, and he says, hey, don't glean in another field. Only take my stuff. Stay in this field. And what you have to see that Boaz is doing is he's like, she needs to stay close to me, okay? I want to be near this woman, so let's make sure that she's staying here. Then Boaz, let your eyes be on, this is verse 9, let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? It was kind of dangerous for a young woman to go out and do this because these fields are outside of the city, they're removed, they're remote, they're far away, and for a young woman to go and follow the reapers, the young men, sometimes it didn't work out so well. And so what Boaz is saying is stay in my field because you'll be safe in my field. He says, and when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. So basically, Ruth is out working, and she didn't bring any water. And so if you're a mom here, you're like, how many times I got to tell her to bring a water bottle? She didn't bring a water bottle. And so Boaz says, don't worry, the well is in the town. So we drew some water. We got it in these big, gallon whatevers. And it's for all the workers, and you can have some. So he's providing for her. And this is her reaction. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground. And she said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I'm a foreigner? So she knows that she's not allowed to get the attention of the Israelite men because she's a foreigner. But there's also something else in this sentence. You can almost hear it. She's like, I'm not worthy of this. I'm not good enough for you. I'm not what the culture says is right. I'm not what the culture says is beautiful. I'm not what the culture says is good in a woman. I'm not what the culture says is feminine. She's saying, I'm not enough. And this is his response. Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, pay attention to this phrase, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And at mealtime, so that's where they first met, right? Where did you first meet? Yeah, this was their story. This is the beginning of it. He's like, who's that lady? And they're like, this is that lady. And he's like, oh, let me go talk to her. That was their first conversation. Here's the next one. Boaz, lost my... At mealtime, Boaz, verse 14, said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. She went to work. She didn't pack a lunch. And I know your moms are like, you didn't pack a water bottle? You didn't pack a lunch? Come on, Ruth, get it together. Don't worry, Boaz has got her back. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her the roasted grain. I love that. He's like, hey, come sit over here. And she doesn't sit next to him. She comes and sit next to the reapers, and he's like, okay, well, I got to get a little closer. So it says that he was able to hand her the morsel. So at some point, he's, got a little closer and handed. Did you see this? This is romance, okay? All right. When she rose to, I skipped some things. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. He gave her so much that she had too much. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, the stuff that we've already reaped, and do not reproach her. Give her extra. And then he says, and pull some of it out of the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. So back then, the poor would glean, and sometimes you'd have a situation in which the poor were maybe trying to take more than the landowner wanted them to have. And so there's this tension between the landowners who are supposed to be providing and the poor who are supposed to be just taking their share. And what happens is the reapers who are doing the work, they would have to get a little violent sometimes. You'd have to kick somebody off of the sheaves. But what Boaz is saying is if she gets, if you think she's getting greedy, let her. If you think that she's taking too much, give her more. That's what he's saying. So he's just radically providing for her. And it says, for her to glean and do not rebuke her. Later it says that she came home to Naomi with 22 liters of grain. So imagine a 2-liter, then multiply that by 11, maths, and then that's what that's what she got plus the leftovers from lunch. So she comes home to Naomi And she can't fit through the door because she's got the sack of grain is too big. And Naomi's like, what? How did you get that much? And then Ruth says, well, I met this nice man named Boaz. And Naomi goes like this, Boaz? He's related to my husband. Now, here's what you got to know. Back in the day, and we still have this today, actually, a little bit different, though. Back in the day, when somebody died, their property went to the next person in the family, the next closest kinsman. And they called them the kinsman redeemer because he would redeem the land or the property. He would say, I'm not going to let that go to waste. I'm going to help it flourish. He's the redeemer. Okay? And so Naomi's like, you met Boaz? He's our redeemer. And so there's this little, in the midst of this romance, there's like this little hint of the gospel, of redemption. Now, back in the day, it wasn't just property, it was also women, which we don't necessarily like, but that's just how it was back then. So that's what's going on. Naomi hears this, and she's like, oh my gosh, our prayers have been answered. This is going to happen. So then, in just like typical old lady fashion, she hatches a plan to catch the man. It's like, boom. She says, Ruth, here's what you're going to do. At the end of the harvest, all the guys who worked for the harvest, they're going to have a feast. They're going to have a party. And they're going to drink a little bit. And then they're going to be sleeping very heavily. Okay, so that's Bible code for you fill in the blank. So they're partying. And what's going to happen is Boaz, he's going to fall asleep somewhere, just out in the open. You know, he's just sleeping. I want you to go up to him when he's sleeping, lay down at his feet and uncover his feet. Okay, let me explain this. This is scandalous. Okay? If you were in this position and your question was, what's the moral thing to do? This is not the answer. But this is the romantic thing to do. So here's what she does. She initiates. She goes. She uncovers his feet, which is just hilarious. It's brilliant to me because it's like, have you ever woken up because your feet were too cold? It's just like, oh, dang it. So she wants him to wake up to see that she's laying at his feet. And he's, the way, I can't explain it all. He's basically laying there in his skivvies. And so she's, anyway, it's scandalous, okay? And that's Naomi's plan to catch the man. And here's Ruth chapter 3, verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law commanded her. Ruth executed the plan. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, Bible code there, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain by himself. She came over softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman was laying at his feet. Sometimes you don't read the Bible right. I just got to show you, like, there's action here, okay? He said, who are you? Fair. And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. And then she says this, spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Do you remember that? He said that to her. God has spread his wings over you. He's going to provide for you. He's going to redeem for you. Look at all the good stuff that you have done for your mother-in-law, and God is going to repay you for that. And she says to him, spread your wings over me. And what she's saying is, the way that God is going to provide for me is by marrying you. And this is, if you're like, well, that's a little forward. Yeah, it's very forward. But this is his reaction. It's beautiful. And when what now? Different verse. And he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness, what you just did, greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. Do you remember when she first met him? She says, I'm not good enough for you. Boaz's reaction now is, you want to marry me? I'm not good enough for you. And you have to see the beauty of this relationship that is budding. And then for time, I'm just going to skip a couple things. Basically, he says, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to marry you, and I'm going to go to town tomorrow, and we're going to take care of all the legal stuff, and I'm going to marry you. And I want you to see this, that romance is a huge part of this story, and it's a part of the story of God, okay? Where did romance come from? It's a created thing. Who created it? God created it. There is something woven into our DNA that craves belonging, not just to like a group or a nation or a club, but belonging to the soul of another person. There is something in us that is magnetically pulling us to another person. And we call this romance, and God has made that, and it's good, and it's a part of your story. And now I know that there's a guy out here who's like, ugh, show me some sports stuff, and I'm like, the emotional pastor's talking about romance. I'm sorry, okay? Here, let me tell you your future. You're gonna walk out of here, you're gonna fall in love someday, and you're gonna make an appointment with me, and you're gonna sit in my office, and you're gonna say, Josh, I love her so much, how do I get her to marry me? And I'm gonna want to point to this day when you were like, show me Tom Brady. But I'm not. And we're gonna make a plan, and it's gonna work, okay? Or you're gonna walk out of here and you're already in love, and you're gonna hit a rough patch, and you're like, it's the same thing. Josh, I love her so much. You turn romantic when you need to, okay? I love her so much. How do I keep her? And I'm gonna want to say, do you remember that day when I was preaching a message and you were like, show me a picture of Tom Brady cutting down a tree with a chainsaw? And I'm like, where's the NASCAR? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm done making fun of guys. I'm gonna want to say, do you remember that? But I'm not going to. We're going to make a plan, and it's going to work, okay? Romance is a part of your story. Now, here's the thing. When romance is a part of our story as Christians, when we get good at this, then it gives us an authority in our culture. You've probably noticed this. Culture and people, they're obsessed with sex and romance. They're obsessed with it. And the stories, and it's a good thing that they're obsessed with it because that's a God-given desire. But in the absence of truth and good stories, they'll make stuff up. Have you ever been to a frat house and heard the stories of love? Those are not good stories. Have you ever watched the Hallmark Channel and thought, that's too perfect? It is. It's not a good story. It's not true, okay? Have you ever watched a music video and thought, nope, that's not a good story? The stories about love in our culture, they're not good. And yet here we are as Christians. Our God made it. Our God created it. Our God's the king of romance. And nobody says, you know what, I really want to take my wife out on a good date. I better ask a Christian. Nobody says that because we don't have that. We don't have that authority in our culture. And then when we realize that this is a part of the story and that we can get good at it, we can begin to tell good stories to the culture around us so that they can be like, wow, tell me more. Tell me if this is classically romantic or not, okay? You got a princess, she's locked in a tower. There's a dragon outside. The dragon says, you can't come out of this tower. And the princess is like, dang it. And then the man, the knight in the shining army, he appears, and he cuts the dragon, and then the dragon dies, and then there's like the castle falls down around him, and you're like, oh no, he died too. And the princess walks out, and she's all like, I'm free, but where is my lover? And then all of a sudden, out of the rubble, a hand comes out, and he's like, I'm right here. You thought I was dead. I wasn't dead. That's romantic, right? What if I told you that we were trapped and enslaved by our sin, but a God who loved us came and died for us so that we could be free, but he didn't stay dead. He rose again to new life so that we could have newness of life and be with him. The gospel is the most romantic thing that's ever happened. Okay, good job, men, for saying that. Amen. All right, I got to end with redemption as the band comes up. Come on up, guys. So Boaz says, I'm going to marry you. I'm going to redeem you. Your life is going to your life's going to crap. Your life is falling apart. You're living in abject poverty. I am going to take you under my wings. I am going to love you. I am going to provide for you. I'm going to be the husband that you always wanted. And he goes in front of the whole town and he says, yeah, that one, I'm marrying that one. And they're like, the Moabite? And he's like, yes, the Moabite. I'm marrying her. And it's this beautiful picture of redemption. Redemption is the idea that we were headed one way and it wasn't good. We're headed for judgment. We're headed for fury. We are headed for pain. But God stepped in and said, no, I am changing the arc of this story by my sacrifice. That will not be your end. You will not end in tragedy. You will end in triumph, my triumph, and you will be redeemed. That's the last chapter of our story. It is redemption. We get to be with a God God who loves us. We get to be with a God who desires us, a God who gave his life so that we could be with him. No other religion gives you that option. In every other religion, tragedy is something to get over. Tragedy is something that the gods have inflicted on you. Only in Christianity is there a God who says, no, that is not your story. It is not the end. I will have the final word, and the final word is redemption. Amen. So, I love the book of Ruth, and I hope now you know why, and I hope you'll read it. It's 4 chapters. It'll take you 20 minutes. You should do it today. Because here's the thing. What you'll see is that every part of this story, the little parts, the big parts, the hard parts, and the best parts, it's all a part of the story. Every part of your life is a part of what God is doing in this city. We're going to transition to a time of worship now, and I don't really know a better way to say, hey, let's worship, than to be like, God's final word is redemption. He wants to be with us. If that doesn't do something in your heart where you're like, yeah, I think I want to praise him now, then, maybe work on that. So we're going to transition to a time of worship now, but I want to say this. If you're here and maybe your marriage is hard, you're here and maybe you have some relationships that are falling apart, you're here and maybe you're going through a tragedy, and it seems like, man, this is it. It's over. My life's over. Tragedy has the final word. Maybe you're going through something, or maybe it's just like some general thing that you're struggling with in your life. We always have a prayer team every service that meets over here. You can come forward and get prayed for during the worship. For the rest of us, let's stand with me now, and we're going to praise the God of the universe.